Professor Martin Shichtman is the Director of Jewish Studies and a Professor of English Language and Literature at Eastern Michigan University. He served as a Fellow at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum and at Brandeis University's Schusterman Institute for Israel Studies. Professor Shichtman received a Mellon Partnership grant with Smith College for Jewish Studies programming and has also directed several National Endowment for Humanities summer seminars for school teachers and an NEH focus grant teaming teachers from Eastern Michigan University with teachers from Detroit's Mumford High School. For the past 5 years, he's directed a summer seminar for school teachers at the Holocaust Memorial Center Zakelman Family Campus in Michigan. Dr. Shichtman is author of 3 books and co-author of another. His field is actually medieval literature, which I don't think he's going to be talking about this evening. And he's published many scholarly articles and given talks all over the country and out of the country, most recently from Australia. And one of the reasons why we brought him here this evening is because he was recently elected to the Executive Committee of the Jewish Literature Division at the MLA, the Modern Language Association. And he's been active in working against the BDS, the Boycott, Divest, Sanction movement that's been put forth inside the MLA. So he has a very interesting on-the-ground perspective to speak on the topic at hand. And I'm so excited that he's here with us this evening. Please give him a warm Cleveland welcome.
Oh, it's fine. That would not be good. Can you all hear me? Good. It's always weird for me to be mic'd. I have a very loud voice, and I'm not accustomed to the technology. So I'm going to talk a little bit about BDS, and I've been involved in trying to stop the BDS movement in the Modern Language Association, but I'll tell you a bit about the movement, and hopefully you'll have questions at the end. The BDS movement, the movement to boycott, divest, and sanction Israel, began in July 2005 when an alliance of more than 170 Palestinian political parties, trade unions, refugee networks, NGOs, and grassroots associations published a call, and this is a quote, to impose broad boycotts and implement divestment initiatives against Israel, similar to those applied to South Africa in the apartheid era. And hold on to that, because the language of apartheid is going to resonate throughout all of this conversation. But the movement gained real momentum when the publication of Tel Aviv University PhD student Omar Borgati's 2011 or 2010, right in between there, book, Boycott, Divestment, Sanctions, The Global Struggle for Palestinian, with the publication of Omar Borgati's 2011 book, Boycott, Divestment, Sanctions, The Global Struggle for Palestinian Rights. A founding committee member of the Palestinian Campaign for the Academic and Cultural Boycott of Israel and co-founder of the Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions movement, the charismatic Borgati frequently compares Israel both to Nazi Germany and to South Africa. He regards Israel as a racist state and argues that Israeli policy towards Palestinians is tantamount to, and this is a quotation, ethnic cleansing. Borgati believes that extreme measures are justified in dealing with Israel, and this is a quotation. From now on, it will be acceptable to compare Israel's apartheid system to its South African predecessor. As a consequence, proposing practical measures to punish Israeli institutions for their role in the racist and colonial policies of their state will no longer be considered beyond the pale. End quote. For all the bluster behind the movement, however, it has actually accomplished very little in the way of causing Israel economic damage. Even Borgati is at something of a loss to boast success. Certainly, a number of entertainment figures, including Stevie Wonder, Lauryn Hill, and Elvis Costello, have bowed to pressure not to perform in Israel. Pink Floyd frontman Roger Waters has been particularly active in encouraging the entertainment boycott. Excuse me. Borgatti also points to, and this is a quote, the huge Dutch pension fund PGGM, whose international investments are close to 200 billion, deciding to divest from the top 5 Israeli banks, the U.S. Presbyterian Church's divestment from Caterpillar, HP, and Motorola Solutions, and Bill Gates' divestment from G4S. Movement leaders take some pleasure in SodaStream's closing its West Bank factory. It moved its plant to Israel's Negev desert, and this caused the unemployment of approximately 600 Palestinian workers. For the most part, however, Israeli business continues as usual. Stars, including Lady Gaga, continue to sell out Israeli arenas. The iPhones used even by the most ardent advocates of BDS are reliant on technologies developed in Israel, including technologies developed by Israeli companies like Anobit, a flash storage company which Apple purchased in 2012. And, most recently, and I love this, former President Jimmy Carter, who frequently refers to Israel as an apartheid state, received cancer treatment using Keytruda, researched and tested at the Tel Hashem Sheba Medical Center. Few BDS advocates seem interested in giving up the generic drugs made by Teva Pharmaceuticals, and Borgatti, who demands that fellow Palestinians endure the pain suffered through job loss, and this is a quotation of his, those who claim that BDS hurts Palestinians are not just making unfounded and unethical claims that fail to understand how resistance is always costly at first. They are also patronizing and telling Palestinians that they understand our interests better than we do. We reject this colonial attitude completely. Even though he says that, he continues his studies at prestigious Tel Aviv. It seems reasonable, therefore, that I'm often asked by members of the Michigan Jewish community why they should care about the BDS movement. They wonder why it matters that colleges, universities, and academic professional organizations have become battlegrounds in the discussion of BDS. They reasonably inquire, how likely is it that Harvard University, the University of Michigan, or Case Western University will elect to divest their holdings in Israeli companies, divest their portfolios of American companies that do business with Israel? Because the answer is it's not likely at all. How likely is it that major universities will discontinue research collaborations with Israeli institutions like Technion, a school with MIT, Caltech caliber innovative potential? Again, not very likely. Is it really important, this is the question, is it really important that academic professional organizations in the humanities and social sciences are currently considering BDS resolutions? After all, does it matter what a bunch of corduroy-wearing, ivory tower intellectuals think in the face of international social, political, and economic reality? Well, I would like to suggest that the BDS debate heating up on American campuses is vitally significant, and we need to pay very close attention to it. On December 16, 2013, the American Studies Association sent shockwaves through academia by endorsing, and this is a quote, the call of Palestinian civil society for a boycott of Israeli academic institutions. It is also resolved that the ASA supports the protected rights of students and scholars everywhere to engage in research and public speaking about Israel-Palestine, and in support of boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement, End quote. Response was immediate. College deans, provosts, and presidents rushed to distance themselves from the ASA. even as a small number of professors stood by the resolution that was, on the face of it, utterly toothless. The ASA is neither a large academic organization, having only about 5,000 members, nor is it a particularly prestigious one. It's difficult to imagine that anyone except the truest of the ASA's true believers actually thought that an academic boycott, or indeed any kind of boycott, of Israel was on the horizon. But a boycott may have never been what was at stake. The ASA's BDS vote was more likely an effort to delegitimize Israel within the discourses of the academic community, to demonstrate that academics could be convinced or coerced into turning from principles of freedom of speech that govern our disciplines. On the heels of the ASA-BDS turmoil, at its January 2014 convention, the Modern Language Association, my professional organization, considered a resolution, 2014-1, requesting the U.S. State Department to, and I quote, contest Israel's denials of entry to the West Bank by United States academics who have been invited to teach, confer, or do research at Palestinian universities. The resolution contained damaging inaccuracies and distortions about intellectual freedom in the state of Israel. It singled out one country for discriminatory treatment based on false or unsubstantiated claims, and it undermined efforts for positive collaboration and building bridges for peace and reconciliation. Unlike the ASA, the MLA was a high-prestige target in the strategy to win the hearts and minds of America's intellectual class. The MLA Vote offered proponents of the BDS movement serious credibility and a platform from which to garner considerably more influence. The proposal threatened to continue a path of politicization within the MLA, drawing the organization further from its mandate while establishing a powerful precedent for a potential boycott resolution at the next year's conference. The MLA is an organization of approximately 24,000 higher educational professionals, representing English and the foreign languages. It is responsible for the most prestigious journal in literary criticism, PMLA. A significant group of publications, including the MLA Handbook for Writers of Research Papers, which you all probably used in college, and a yearly conference that attracts nearly 10,000 scholars and also functions as a highly competitive job fair. The association has a long history of taking political positions, promoting higher education in general and the humanities in particular. Depending on one's stake in the debate, MLA Resolution 2014-1 was in keeping with the organization's deep commitment to the open exchange of ideas, or, and this is where I stand, a terrible veering away from the association's mission into a space where scholars are denied the very capacities for expression we are so determined to protect. I've been an MLA member for more than 30 years, and I served on the MLA's delegate assembly. When Resolution 2014-1 was brought before the delegate assembly, I joined Dr. Carrie Nelson from the University of Illinois, a life member of MLA and a former president of the American Association of University Professors, AAUP, which is the union that most of us belong to. Dr. Russell Berman of Stanford, a former president of MLA, and Rachel Harris, assistant professor of comparative literature at the University of Illinois, to form MLA Members for Scholars' Rights, a group founded to oppose efforts that abridge academic freedom through boycotts and other means. We believe in applying comparable professional standards to all countries, and thus we consider it discriminatory to single out one nation for criticism, and that includes Israel, when others are not held to the same standard. Our group lobbied the delegate assembly to defeat the resolution. We offered a preponderance of evidence showing that 2014-1 mischaracterizes freedom of movement for academics entering Palestinian territories. 2, overlooks key facts and contexts. 3, is based on minimal, weak, and unconvincing testimony. 4, does not adequately follow MLA policy procedure. And most important, 5, is biased and discriminatory. After one of the most antagonistic and poorly run meetings I have ever witnessed, discussion of Resolution 2014-1 lasted over 3 hours. It was interrupted by questions, comments, amendments, counterproposals, and the constant failure of the chair to maintain any kind of parliamentary order. We would later find out that the chair, MLA's incoming president, Margaret Ferguson, was an endorser of a petition advocating the U.S. campaign for the academic and cultural boycott of Israel. Many members left before the final vote. It was the faculty meeting from hell. And I realize that most of you have never been to faculty meetings, but they're awful. Because it's a lot of pretentious people all needing to speak. And this was the faculty meeting from hell. The delegate assembly voted to support the resolution, albeit just barely, 60 to 53. And it sent it forward to be considered first by the MLA Executive Committee and then by the membership as a whole. So the sanction proposal passed. The membership vote was contentious. What strikes me as particularly unnerving about the conversation surrounding the vote is that some advocates of MLA Proposal 2014-1, intellectuals tasked with teaching in colleges and universities, were given free rein to voice anti-Semitic rhetoric just so long as they tangentially alluded to Israel. When Professors Nelson, Berman, and I emailed information to fellow MLA members explaining our reasons for discomfort with the resolution, we were called on the MLA discussion board shady, an outside group. Omar Barghouti, on the other hand, a genuine outsider, he's an engineer, whose support for BDS involves statements like, Israel's charge of racism, there's a quote, Israel's charge of racism against the BDS movement is akin to the Ku Klux Klan accusing Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks of racism. It is blatantly propagandistic, end quote. He was invited by proposal supporters to speak at the MLA conference. Intimations were made that MLA Members for Scholars' Rights was part of a large conspiracy and somehow had secret access to vast resources, if only. After being told that our letters to MLA members cost relatively little, BDS supporter and now a member of the MLA Executive Council, David Palumbo-Liu of Stanford University, argued, and I quote, at 2 to 3 cents an email address, it seems a bit low on the pay scale. Yes, he actually suggested that we were, at the same time, both rich Jews and cheap ones. We were clustered among, and this is a quote, Zionist attack dogs, end quote. Consider this comment from Professor Bassem El Raad of Al-Quds University, justifying the use of such language. Zionist attack dogs was probably used metaphorically. However, considering the undue and unfair pressures being exercised on universities by Zionist funders and lobby groups to quell any dissent or objection to Israel's colonial activities, as well as Zionist academics using their past or present positions to strangle resistant voices, not to mention Zionist politicians pushing the U.S. into disastrous wars, the expression may be severe, but not far from the truth. End quote. In a later post, Professor Raad insisted, and this is a quote, there are some out there who have shown intolerance, who control and twist the media, who silence the truth, who flex their muscle, who organize unfair and biased campaigns, who have even pushed the U.S. to wars for Israel's sake. and who have worked their money or influence to destroy academics or students who express solidarity with the Palestinian cause or any criticism of what it should be, to any fair human, an unbearable situation that needs to be rectified, end quote. Alessio Liro, at the time an adjunct visiting professor at Temple University, indicated that the proposal should be supported because it would undermine, and I quote, the humongous influence that Jewish scholars have in the decision-making process of academia in general, end quote. When questioned about Liro's comments, along with his occasional denials of the Holocaust, and Liro has written, and this is a quotation, 6 million? We all know or should know that the counting of Jews is a bit controversial, end quote. When questioned about him, Temple University supported its faculty member, insisting, quote, the exercise of academic freedom necessarily results in a vigorous exchange of ideas, end quote. In other words, Liro owes his pathetic, disgusting career as an academician to the very liberties that he would deny Israeli scholars. While I do not believe that all colleagues supporting the resolution were necessarily anti-Semitic, discussion board commentary certainly led me to wonder about the company they keep. It also makes me wonder why colleagues supporting the proposal, who often take great pains to insist that criticisms of Israel are not anti-Semitic, would refrain from criticizing those who are clearly anti-Semites. Are they afraid to acknowledge that there is some very poisonous rhetoric coming from their side? Are they so connected to the Palestinian community that they can no longer even recognize the anti-Semitic discourse emanating from that quarter? Are they so intent on winning that they are willing to align themselves even with anti-Semites to ensure victory? And what sort of victory would that be? Are they so filled with self-hatred that they don't notice anti-Semitism when it comes their way? Many of the proposal's supporters are Jews, including the proposal's co-author and co-sponsor, Bruce Robbins. Interestingly enough, Bruce Robbins' brother, Jeffrey Robbins, United States delegate to the United Nations Human Rights Commission in the Clinton administration, wrote passionately in the Times of Israel condemning MLA 2014-1. Is it possible that when former MLA President Marianne Hirsch, who balances the roles of BDS advocate, second-generation Holocaust survivor, and Jewish studies scholar, author of, among other things, The Generation of Post-Memory, Writing and Visual Culture After the Holocaust, when she criticizes MLA members for scholars' rights as, quote, an outside group violating the integrity of the process, end quote, she also imagines international conspiracies of rich, powerful, brutal, murderous Jews who control, let's face it, everything. I worry, and I think with some good reason, that the language of anti-Semitism is becoming normalized in intellectual circles, and that BDS is a powerful force towards the normalization of anti-Semitism. Higher education is under assault from many quarters. Even as our students labor under increasing debt, even as our institutions are more and more reliant on contingent labor, even as politicians criticize the professoriate as overpaid, underworked, and out of touch, we struggle to maintain America's systems of colleges and universities as the best in the world. BDS resolutions like MLA 2014-1 distract scholars from our principal mission. They are discriminatory and violate everything we believe in regarding both academic freedom and the freedom of expression. But the methods and objectives of BDS are insidious. The movement cloaks itself in the passionate language of social justice, even as it veers off into the continuous use of anti-Semitic tropes and allows anti-Semites considerable latitude to spew their filth. MLA Resolution 2014-1 failed. Nevertheless, even in failure, it caused controversy. For ratification, an MLA resolution requires 2,390 favorable votes, or 10% of the entire membership. Resolution 2014-1 received 1,560 votes in support and 1,063 against, a result prompting Omar Barghouti to declare that his Palestinian campaign for academic and cultural boycott of Israel was, and I quote, buoyed and inspired by the MLA vote. The fact that 60% of the total votes cast, 1,500 out of 2,500, supported the resolution to censure Israel is quite a significant development, given the MLA's prominence. It may usher in further measures holding Israel accountable for its regime of occupation and apartheid, and holding its academic institutions to account for their deep and persistent complicity in this regime. The trend cannot be mistaken. Gone are the days when Israel's lobby could impose its will through the usual bullying and smearing tactics, end quote. The electronic intifada's headline was, quote, large majority votes for MLA resolution condemning Israeli restrictions on academics, end quote. At the January 2015 MLA conference, BDS advocates sought to bring a full-blown Israel boycott resolution to the floor of the General Assembly. Their plans were undermined when a conflicting resolution demanding that the organization reject the principle of scholarly boycott was also offered to the Executive Council, which recognized that, given MLA's voting procedures, both measures could pass. The Executive Council essentially kicked the BDS can 2 years down the road, deferring all boycott resolutions and calling instead for several public debates during the 2016 convention. That's this year's convention. But BDS is very unlikely to go away, and its proponents now wish to remove the 10% rule that stymied them in 2014. Very few MLA members care about the issues involved in the BDS conversation, given the many other more compelling problems with which we must contend. The MLA Commons Group, MLA Members for Justice in Palestine, only has 76 members, at least when I most recently counted. Significantly more, unfortunately, than the 20 who subscribe to the opposing group, Scholarship, Censorship, and Exclusion. But BDS sponsors are committed, relentless, and very vocal. A number of BDS advocates were elected this year to the Executive Council. At MLA, BDS proponents congratulate themselves as social justice visionaries, even as they undermine majority rule, even as they trouble freedom of expression, even as they repeat, perhaps even take their identity from the rhetoric of anti-Semitism. So, this year, two very important academic organizations were faced with BDS resolutions. On November 20, 2015, a record 1,800 participants voted for a resolution requiring an academic boycott of Israel at the largest business meeting in the history of the American Anthropological Association. Sponsored by academics calling themselves anthropologists for the boycott of Israeli academic institutions, the resolution would bar the AAA from, and I quote, formal collaborations or other relationships with Israeli academic institutions, end quote. We can talk about what that means later. Justification for the resolution was chilling. Anthropologists for boycott of Israeli academic institutions insisted, and I quote, As heirs to a long tradition of scholarship on colonialism, anthropologists affirm through this resolution that the core problem is Israel's maintenance of a settler colonial regime based on Jewish supremacy and Palestinian dispossession. By supporting the boycott, anthropologists are taking a stand for justice through action in solidarity with Palestinians. Even more chilling was the overwhelming 88.4% of anthropologists, 1,044 to 138 against, who supported this language. The vote was no accident. A counterproposal brought forth by 30 Israeli academics to stop boycott language was cast aside. As boycott advocates noted, and there's a quote, "Today's historic result is due to over 3 years of organizing within the organization to educate and mobilize members to stand against Israel's widespread, systematic, and ongoing violations of Palestinian rights, as well as to protest the complicity of Israeli academic institutions in these abuses. The vote was also a powerful act of protest against U.S. support for Israeli actions." End quote. The AAA is by no means done with BDS. The organization's 1,200 members must still ratify the business meeting vote. Whereas a BDS vote failed in 2014, this one will likely pass, making the AAA the largest academic organization to adopt boycott rhetoric. Equally distressing was a late November vote by the National Women's Studies Association on a resolution brought forward by Feminists for Justice in for Palestine, a group founded at the 2014 National Women's Studies Association conference. This group, drawing on, and I quote, transnational, intersectional feminist frameworks to emphasize an indivisible sense of justice, end quote, encouraged the association to join the international boycott, divest, and sanctions movement. The resolution objected to, quote, the colonial displacement of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians during the 1948 Nakba. So they're going back to 48. That's important. The discriminatory treatment, exclusion, military siege, and apartheid imposed by Israel on its own Palestinian citizens, as well as those residing in the occupied territories, constitute flagrant breaches of international law, UN resolutions, and fundamental human rights. In the present moments, our counterparts in Palestine face daily violations of their human rights, including their academic rights to free speech, excuse me, assembly, association, and movement. At the same time, Israeli institutions of higher learning have not challenged, but instead legitimized Israel's oppressive policies and violations. These violations, which severely impact the daily lives and working conditions of Palestinian scholars, students, and society at large, are also enabled by U.S. tax dollars and the tacit support of Western powers. So, 35% of the National Women's Studies Association cast ballots considering the resolution. 88.4% favored its passage. BDS resolutions have been passed by the African Literature Association, the American Studies Association, the Association for Asian American Studies, the Association for Humanist Sociology, the Critical Ethnic Studies Association, the National Association of Chicana and Chicano Studies, the Native American and Indigenous Studies Association, the Peace and Justice Studies Association, the United Auto Workers Local 2865, and the University of California Student Workers Union. Very likely, the Modern Language Association will face a BDS resolution in 2017. It is unclear right now how it will fare. Almost always, these resolutions are fueled by a rhetoric of human rights, social justice, combined with discourses of feminism and post-colonial theory. They may also be more than a little anti-Semitic, but BDS supporters spend much of their time denying the anti-Semitism of their efforts. This language is compelling to our students, children ardent for some desperate glory. So, see if I can make this work. You are looking at a mural on the wall of the Student Center at York University in Toronto. It was selected by a group of students and faculty. It shows a figure standing in front of a large home. He is wearing a scarf that presents the entire state of Israel as Palestine. He is holding stones, waiting, it seems, to use them as projectiles. The artist has told us that it's up to the person looking at the painting to decide whether or not those stones will in fact be used as projectiles, in essence putting the viewer of the painting into a position of complicity with the stone holder. This glorification of the figure of the terrorist is now the new normal on our campuses. As noted in the Times of Israel, quote, in a recent interview with YFS, York Federation of Students President-elect Mithilin Mathapalan, he revealed that the student union, Mithilin Mathapalan, revealed that the student union exists chiefly to encourage the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement against Israel. When Mathapalan was asked about his main platform for the year 2015, he said, the first one is divestment, end quote. We are not winning this fight. And gestures of belligerence, calling an anti-Semite, seems to play into the hands of those who characterize Israelis, Zionists, indeed Jews, as aggressive, brutal, and uncompromising. Still, we cannot allow ourselves to be worn down, to be beaten by this movement. Thank you very much. Now I can't get rid of this, although I really want to. Yes? Ah, that'll help. Give you this mic. Can I answer some questions? I know it's not happy. I'm sorry.
Thank you very much for your lecture. I'm very sad that you have, you think we're losing. I think what they capitalize on is ignorance. 1948, the Palestinians that were in Israel were encouraged by their leadership to leave Israel. And yes, well, whenever there are these cases coming up in the incidences that you listed, why not disseminate that publicly? Why not talk about historical facts that the Palestinians were used as weapons, literally lined up and left instead of being integrated? I closed 2 of their meetings. I went out of curiosity by just talking about the facts. And we have to stop being up here, talk about the facts. Why can't that be done?
I think part of the problem is that emotions are far more compelling than the facts, and the emotions that are motivated by pictures of children in wartime are more compelling than facts about how those children have been placed in the situation they are in. We have been disseminating the facts all the time. I mean, there is a great deal of effort to disseminate the facts that you are speaking about. The issue has very little to do with facts and a great deal to do with a lot of things. A lot of it has to do with Western guilt. A lot of it has to do with emotions. There's a lot of things in play here. There's a lot of ways our ideas of social justice have been used in terms of this conversation. There's a great deal in play here. Facts are not enough. To put it bluntly, facts simply are not enough. I wish they were, but they're not. And I think, if you've watched even our own presidential conversations, and you've seen the way facts are easily manipulated, facts simply aren't enough. We need to change the conversation somehow, and we've not yet found a way to change the conversation to, it wasn't that long ago that America's left loved Israel. I mean, Israel was the darling of America's left. That is not the case now.
I'd like to ask you about a little bit about the ramifications of BDS. You began the talk by saying that your understanding was that it didn't have real economic ramifications.
Right.
It seemed like the focus was the ramifications for us as Americans, the anti-Semitism that's associated with it. I'm wondering if are there any political, social implications for the politics in Israel that are being affected by BDS?
Well, okay, so I was watching this TV show Homeland last weekend, and a member of Hamas says America is in retreat and Israel is isolated. He's concerned that there's going to be a bombing in Germany, a terrorist bombing in Germany, and he thinks it's counterproductive because America's already in retreat and Israel's already isolated. I think what the BDS movement is successful at doing is not so much hindering Israel economically, but isolating Israel. And I think that kind of isolation is changing Israeli politics, certainly. I mean, Israeli politics have swung very much to the right as Israel has become more and more isolated. And it's changing Israel's prestige in terms of how it appears in the world. Israel is starting to be seen and talked about with a great degree of frequency as an apartheid state.
But ultimately, I think you're saying that it's having the opposite effect of what it's hoping to have?
I'm not sure it's having the opposite effect of what it's hoping, because most BDS advocates that I know are one-state solution people. And as one-state solution people, what they're able to argue as Israel swings further and further to the right is that Israel is utterly out of touch with the world, and that its government is repressive and Nazi-like, and that a one-state solution is the solution that is required, a one-state solution that will be a Palestinian state.
It was a very interesting talk. The problem is you defined the problem, but you didn't define or suggest a reasonable solution.
I wish I had one.
Well, I have one.
Okay.
Okay, I don't want to sound like Donald Trump, but basically you named a bunch of organizations which I have academic affiliations, and a lot of these organizations I never heard of. Mm-hmm. Okay? Now, what I would suggest is that we boycott the boycotters. It's very simple. You named organizations, you named people. There's other organizations too besides those which you are affiliated with or you have knowledge about. You name the organizations, you name the people in the organizations. Now, when people want to give grants and professorships and advancements and give papers, these people are known entities, and there are people like us, both in the business and academic communities, who have the power, so to speak, and the influence that can affect these people. You hit them in the pocketbook. That's where you hit them. You hit them in the professional status that they have. That's how you get rid of this type of crap that's going on.
Let me tell you why I have concerns about that method. And there are a number of reasons. So some of them are emotional. I've been an MLA member of 30 years. If it passes a boycott resolution, do I quit? And I might. My quitting and several hundred members, or even maybe several thousand members quitting, is not going to disempower the MLA as still the most prestigious organization, probably in the humanities. But there's also a different question at play, and that is a question of what I actually believe in. And what I believe in is the free exchange of ideas. So, for instance, on my campus, we just had a speaker who was brought in and who was a pro-BDS speaker. And I did not oppose him. And the reason I did not oppose him, the reason I did not raise flags all over the place, was because I bring in several anti-BDS speakers every year. And I want to be able to do that. And I want there to be conversations, because that's what a university is about. That's what academic institutions are about. We have these conversations. The thing is we need to be doing a better job at having these conversations. Shutting them down is not the answer. Shutting them off is not the answer. Speaking up is definitely the answer. But let me just say that, and here's an interesting thing at stake. So somebody like Omar Barghouti is flying all over the world talking about this stuff, and no one knows how or why. Well, we know why. We don't know how. We don't know who's supporting him. He's being supported by lots of NGOs, and he's being supported by individual donors. He's being supported by a lot of people. You can't do what he does without significant dollars behind you. The people who were able to pass the American Anthropological Association BDS proposal had to have had significant financial support behind them. There is support going to these places. I've got to tell you, the people who are opposed to BDS don't have this kind of support. This kind of support is going to other places. And for all that we are being accused of this gigantic Jewish moneyed conspiracy, we're working on nothing. I've talked with any number and I've got to say this, and this is, take this or leave this how you wish. I have sat down in a room with people who are opposed to the BDS movement, mostly intellectuals on America's left, and they are opposed to the BDS movement. And if you put, a dozen Jewish intellectuals in a room with any particular thing, you're going to get a dozen very different and divergent ideas. The people who are in favor of BDS are in favor of it uncompromisingly, directly, and it is what they want. We on the other side are flailing around with different kinds of specifics and with different kinds of ideas, and some of us believe that, okay, we should not support the occupied territories, but we should support the state of Israel. I mean, we're all over the place, and we need in some sense to get a sense of who we are and what we believe in, and we don't have that, and that's important too.
I actually have two questions. One
Yes.
is, has it been identified who is the financial backing for these?
It has not been identified.
Is somebody trying to identify
there are
it?
some NGOs that have been identified. Scholars are working on this. There are some that have been identified, but funding that's coming from places like Saudi Arabia and Qatar, and I mean, we just don't know what's coming and where.
Right,
And
but
by
you-
the
but
way,
you
I've got to
believe
say
there
this.
is funding.
I don't think a lot of the people who are involved in the BDS movement know where the funding that's supporting their movement is coming from.
Well, right, that's kind of my point, is that
Yeah.
if we can bring that to light, that might embarrass a lot of people to
It
know
might.
that they're supporting
It might.
Iran.
But I'm
or
not sure how we
Hezbollah.
find that out. I mean, in some cases we know. I mean, we know, for instance, that you know, there are some American churches that are supporting these things, and we know who they are. But I would say the large-scale funding that's going toward this, we still have no idea.
Okay, my second question is, do you have any sense of how aware Israeli nationals are of the BDS movement?
That's a great question. So, I was at a Israel Studies conference 2 years ago to talk about BDS, and in Israel at Ben Gurion in the Negev, and as of 2 years ago, the Israelis sort of didn't really believe it was important. I think that is changing, by the way. I think certainly Netanyahu has said it is an important and dangerous movement. But I think, you know, it has taken Israelis a while to get a sense of, in part because they are isolated, to get a sense that what the rest of the world thinks matters. I mean, Israel is, you know, there's been a recent rash of articles in the Forward about Israel and about BDS, and J.J. Goldberg, you know, said that one of the things that a lot of Americans don't understand is how really, really frightened Israelis are, and why that concern for their existence motivates their politics and continues to isolate them. I think that isolation has many different kinds of ramifications, but not the least of which is that, you know, I mean, Israelis at some point are going to say, we really don't care what American academics think. We've got our own concerns. But I think more and more Israelis are starting to say, well, maybe what American academics think, and maybe what they're teaching their students is of some real concern.
For this,
Yes.
and those that have voted for it. Can you tell us about organizations that have voted against this, academic organizations that have voted against it? And also, a second question, please. What Jewish organizations that have information that they disseminate to students through Hillel and other organizations on campus, what are they doing in terms of any type of an organized approach, not I'll do it my way, you do it your way?
One of the problems is there's a lot of I'll do it my way, you do it your way. And I've got to say that. And because there has been in the United States a kind of attack on the professoriate from a lot of different places, not the least of which is organizations like Hillel, the professoriate has become more isolated as well. But let me get back to some of the earlier questions, and then I'll come back to that. One of the things to keep in mind about these votes is that even in a case of the Women's Studies group, in which you're having 35, you know, in which 84% of the people who voted for this, only 35% of the membership voted. It's still, that's a huge sample, by the way, but it's still only 35%. For all the publicity that Barghouti and Electronic Intifada drew from the MLA vote in 2014, you know, less than 10% of the MLA membership voted. And I know actually a lot of MLA members who simply said, I don't want any part of this. This is not what I do. I'm not voting at all. So they, in essence, voted by not voting. Now, if that 10% rule is done away with, then everything becomes different. But right now, in order for one of these resolutions to pass, it needs 10%. So not voting is a kind of voting. How members will vote when a more full-fledged boycott resolution is brought before MLA, and it will be, I don't know. I think that that they're working harder than we are. So National Women's Studies, the Anthropological Association rejected a boycott resolution, and then the following year passed it. MLA rejected a boycott resolution, more or less, and I don't know whether we'll pass it in 2017 or not. We're going to keep getting, I mean, as far as the boycott people are concerned, they're going to keep throwing these at us until we get it right. As I said, there's a kind of relentlessness about this. It's going to keep happening until we vote the way they want us to. And they'll keep changing it, and it'll keep shifting. So it's going to, it's going to keep rising. And we have to be attentive to it. And for most scholars, this is a hard thing to do. I mean, we're teaching, most scholars, this is not their first consideration. Their consideration is teaching sociology or teaching French. And so it's an easy thing not to pay much attention to. And what we're seeing on TV, I mean, the media doesn't help. The way that the arguments have been manipulated doesn't help. It's a tough fight right now to oppose BDS. And in a profession that skews to the left. So Carrie Nelson is a professor at the University of Illinois. He's recently retired. Carrie is one of the great lions of the American left. He's a former president of the American Association of University Professors, the teachers' union for university professors. And when Carrie opposed BDS, and when he opposed the University of Illinois' hiring of a faculty member named Salida, Stephen Salida had tweeted, among other things, that anti-Semitism became honorable since 1948. When Carrie opposed Stephen Salida's hiring, and when he opposed BDS, he lost friends. He lost. I mean, he has now become, at least on the left, the butt of a joke. This is difficult. In some ways, it's easier to simply be silent than to take up the cause, and especially because the cause in being against BDS is much more amorphous than being for it. So it's been difficult. Carrie, because he is that kind of guy, is simply going to do what he believes is right. And you may agree with him or disagree with him, doesn't really matter. We find ourselves in more and more. Am I lying?
No.
No. I mean, that's...
And I think also there's the element that many people who might oppose BDS agree with many of the liberal political stances about criticizing Israel and the occupation. And that puts people in a very tricky, awkward situation.
Yes.
And that's part of, I think, what you're talking about, making it hard for the anti-BDS people to come together to have a single voice. People politically are on a very large spectrum.
That's right. That's right.
I live in how
Off a, because fewer anti-Semites. What I that allows for anti-Semitism, and or allows for a rhetoric of anti-Semitism that most of us are willing to sort of tolerate, but certainly it's not easy to step forward and say, wait a minute, that's anti-Semitic, especially because as soon as you do that, then you're accused of being hypersensitive and a lot of other things, and you're accused of being a Zionist, and you're accused of conflating feelings about Israel into an accusation of anti-Semitism. The fact is that the rhetoric often is anti-Semitic, and we tolerate it because pro-BDS people say, well, it's not really about Jews, it's just about Israel.
their views to the students. So what will be the next generation?
This is my concern as well, that our students, when all is, we hope they actually learn something from us, and what they're learning is not unproblematic. I think that we have to make it our business to allow multiple points of views on our campuses. And I think that's what a lot of us are trying to do. It's not an easy thing.
I know there's still a few questions left. I want to get to wrap up. So what I'm going to do is I have 3 people that have been waiting patiently. I'm going to take their questions. Marty, are you okay if I sort of take the 3 as a group and you sort of decide how to wrap up?
Whatever works for you.
Okay, all right. So here we go.
These people have been very patient with me.
Okay.
Thanks. I just wanted to respond to this gentleman's question. I'm a Jewish professional and I work for an international Jewish organization. And although it may seem like there are a lot of different voices because this is a very compelling issue to a lot of people, there have been a lot of initiatives that have sprung up over the last 2 or 3 years between the main national organizations that are trying to figure out how to navigate it. And there is a lot of cooperation between Hillel Federation, AJC, all these organizations. So it is a concern.
But even Hillel has fallen under attack with the Open Hillel movement, and I mean, this is a multi-pronged attack that has caught us all off balance in lots of kinds of ways, and that's why I'm less than confident that we're going to be able to handle it terribly well, because every time we seem to have a position of strength, it's a kind of. It's almost as though every time we move forward, we find ourselves tripping over our own feet. And so, yes, something as strong as Hillel, becomes subjected to the Open Hillel movement, which, demands that Hillel have to consider anti-Israel positions within its chapters.
So I'm actually a president of Hillel in Miami of Ohio.
Good for you.
Yeah, thank you. But I'm very lucky, though, to be in a campus that's pretty conservative, and there isn't too much anti-Semitism or anti-Israel ideas. But I do know that a lot of my friends in other universities do have BDS movements that are occurring and being supported. So my efforts, especially as president, are trying to promote support for Israel, and also I work pretty close with the Muslim Student Association. But what I'd like to know is, what are the most primary and pertinent concerns with having a BDS movement at a school, a university, and what are some ways that we can gain support from professors and as well from students as well?
My answer to that is, and I believe this, and I believe this deeply, what I find most objectionable about BDS is not its anti-Israelness, actually. What I find most objectionable about BDS is the way it attempts to stifle free speech. That BDS does, by saying that we will not allow Israelis to speak on campus, that we will, professors are saying that we will not write letters of recommendation for Israeli colleagues, we will not allow Israeli colleagues to come to our universities. Basically, we're cutting off free speech, and that is what makes our educational institutions great. So I think, for me, the most compelling way to go after the BDS movement, or the most compelling way to criticize the BDS movement, is to say that look, it damages the very things that we believe that educational institutions believe in and should believe in. If you don't like Israel, that's fine. You have the right to say that. You have the right to believe it. You have the right to voice that. There are lots of Israelis that voice that, and they should be able to voice that here as well. And I think that for many of us, what's really at stake here is turning our universities and our professional organizations into spaces that are not going to allow for voices we don't necessarily, or voices that may trouble us. And I think we need those voices. We need those voices all the time. Those are the voices that enable us to find our own definition.
Okay, and our last question.
I just came back from Israel, and since it's an apartheid state, and I went into the shopping malls and saw the Arab women walking around buying and shopping as I did. This is an illogical thing. We cannot seem to fight something where we on the Jewish side are liberal, willing to listen, willing to negotiate, and they on the other side are not willing to negotiate or to listen. They have one agenda, and that's to get rid of us.
So I guess my only response to the statement is, while I agree with you, I don't know how to stop the arguments, many of which are untrue, that don't agree with you, but nonetheless are echoing throughout our media and echoing throughout our campuses, and our education. And so that's what I'm here to talk about, is that, I'm glad you believe that. That's right. But maybe what you need to do is go out there and talk about it, because the people who are saying things otherwise are really out there, and they're talking about it, and they're talking about it all the time, and they're talking about it to your children and your grandchildren and perhaps your great-grandchildren. At least they're going to be. That the air is filled with their rhetoric, and it needs to be filled more with yours. Yes.
We seem to be much more liberal in listening than they are.
And that's why our job, and I think that's part of what I'm saying, that's why our job is that much harder and it's a lot more hard, a lot more difficult. A lot more hard. It's a lot more difficult. I'm an English teacher. This is awful. I'm so embarrassed. It's a lot more difficult because they have pretty much a singular agenda, and our agendas are multiple, and they're sometimes in opposition, and they're troubled by a lot of our past. And yet we need to be able to say that things like boycott, divestment, and sanctions are wrong. On the face of it, they're wrong. You know, and we need to be able to say, even if you're right about some of the things you're saying, it's still a bad business.
That's what I'm saying. You are more liberal, willing to listen. And the people in the academic world who are Jewish, for the most part, are willing to listen to
Yes.
the other side.
Yes.
And they
Yes.
are not. I'm sorry.
But I will say this because I recently said to a friend of mine much further on the left from me, you know, I said, I understand your frustration. I mean, I get it. I get your frustration. But just because you're frustrated doesn't mean you need to do something stupid. And I think BDS is something stupid. Now, I get your frustration, but you don't have to do something stupid. And that's where we are.
Thanks, Marty, so much for sharing your experiences and your thoughts with everyone.